The first time Clark noticed the boy, it was barely past 6. The air still carried a dampness from the night's rain, and the sun hadn't yet bothered to rise over the gray skyline. The bakery's windows were fogged from the ovens inside, but the boy was there still as a photograph standing just outside the glass door. He wasn't begging. He wasn't selling. He simply stood with his hands in his hoodie pockets, eyes fixed on the trays inside. His nose barely reached the bottom of the window frame. Clark, who prided himself on noticing everything, almost walked past without a second glance. He turned the key in the lock, gave the glass a push, and felt the faint resistance of the morning wind pressing back. The boy didn't flinch. He just looked up at Clark with clear, calm eyes. "I don't want money, sir," he said. "I just like the smell. It makes my stomach calm." It wasn't the words. It was the way they were said quietly, like the boy was apologizing for existing. Clark stood frozen for half a second too long, hands still on the brass door handle. "You can't stand there," he said, clearing his throat. The words came out harder than he meant. "People walk here." The boy nodded like he understood rules better than children should. He stepped aside, but didn't leave. Inside, Clark went through the usual motions, turned on the lights, checked the delivery list, adjusted the pastries behind the glass. The warmth of the ovens rolled outward and steamed the windows anew. But every so often he glanced toward the foggy outline still lingering near the window. The boy had a brown paper bag in one hand, empty by the way it folded and creased, and wore a hoodie that was too large, the cuffs torn, the pockets sagging. His shoes were mismatched in color and size. And still, he didn't ask for anything. By the time Clark opened the door to customers an hour later, the boy was gone. He told himself it was nothing, just a city kid killing time. The city had plenty. But the next morning, at exactly the same hour, the boy was there again, standing in the exact same spot, hands in pockets, face lifted slightly as if inhaling warmth. This time, Clark didn't say anything. He unlocked the door, went inside, and busied himself with croissants and cardamom buns. Only later did he realize he'd left the front lights off longer than usual, and for the first time in years, he forgot to unlock the customer bathroom. The third morning it rained. Not the harsh kind, just a gentle drizzle that slicked the sidewalk and made the neon lights of the 24-hour laundromat across the street look like they were melting. The boy was there anyway, his hood up soaked through by the time Clark arrived. Still not asking, still not leaving. That morning, Clark didn't unlock the door right away. He stood behind the glass and watched. The boy didn't fidget. He didn't knock. He just leaned closer, eyes tracing the gentle fog trails from the cinnamon rolls rising behind the glass. It was the paper bag that caught Clark's attention again. It was neatly folded, pressed flat, and tucked beneath the boy's arm like something sacred. He stepped outside with a leftover biscuit in a paper napkin, still warm, still soft in the middle. "Here," he said, without looking directly at the boy. The boy's eyes widened just slightly. "Can I?" Clark nodded gruffly, already turning back toward the door. "I'll save half for my sister," the boy said behind him. "She likes the sweet part in the middle." Clark stopped. He didn't turn around, didn't say a word. He just stood there for a moment, the drizzle soaking into the shoulders of his pressed shirt, his hand still on the doorknob. He hadn't spoken to a child in years. Not since the hospital. He hadn't felt this still in years. Inside, he watched as the boy carefully placed the biscuit into the folded paper bag, wrapping it in the napkin like it was something breakable. Then, just like before, the boy left without a backward glance. By the time the morning rush began, suits and scrubs and joggers with AirPods in, Clark was already behind the counter, sleeves rolled, hands dusted in flour. His movements were slower, today not in speed, but in thought. He found himself looking at the tray of leftover pastries and wondering if they would fit in a smaller bag. A more careful bag. That afternoon, he noticed something else. The boy had left no crumbs behind. Not a single one. And for the first time in years, Clark didn't open the shop on time. The next morning, the boy was already there when Clark arrived, same time, same spot, same stillness. The drizzle from yesterday had dried to a cold sheen on the pavement, leaving the air damp and metallic. Clark unlocked the bakery door and nodded at the boy, saying nothing. He had tucked a biscuit into a napkin again this time, not a leftover, but one pulled fresh from the tray before sunrise, still warm, still soft in the middle. He didn't hand it to the boy this time. Instead, he placed it gently in a small paper bag and walked outside to leave it on the bench near the door. When he stepped back inside, he didn't look to see if the boy took it, but the bag was gone the next time he glanced over. He was halfway through prepping the raspberry braids when he noticed something. The paper bag emptied of the biscuit was now folded neatly and resting on the bench, as if returned. Clark's squinted brow furrowed. No child in the city ever returned a bag. A few minutes later, the bell above the bakery door jingled. Not the boy, it was the usual wave of office workers picking up morning orders. He moved through the motions with muscle memory alone, his eyes flicking now and then to the bench outside. There was something off about this entire rhythm, and something deeply familiar. Later that day, Clark sat in the back room with his usual half cup of coffee. He rarely took breaks, not because he was too busy, but because sitting made the silence feel louder. But today he sat still holding the paper bag. The bag had a small wrinkle in the corner, just like the ones his daughter used to fold when she packed imaginary lunches for her dolls. He ran his thumb over the crease and his jaw tightened. He didn't know the boy's name. Didn't even know if the sister existed, or if it was a trick to get more food. But something about the way the boy had said it. "I'll save half for my sister. She likes the sweet part in the middle." It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded rehearsed in the way that pain becomes a habit. The next morning, Clark left the biscuit in the bag again, but added a second one. He wasn't sure why. He didn't leave a note, didn't wait to see if the boy noticed. Just returned inside, folded a dish towel too many times, and scolded himself for losing time. Around mid-morning, he stepped outside to wipe down the bench. The bag was gone, but a napkin had been left in its place. Folded, not just crumpled or tossed aside, but carefully folded into a little rectangle. He picked it up. On one side, drawn in smudged blue ink, was a tiny flower crudely done, likely with a cheap ballpoint pen. That night, Clark found himself staring at the napkin on his kitchen counter instead of the late-night news. He didn't throw it away. He placed it beside a stack of unopened mail and turned off the television halfway through the weather report. The following day, he saw the boy again. This time, he watched as the child pressed the biscuit bag against his chest and jogged down the block. Clark debated it only for a moment before stepping out of the bakery and following him, keeping distance moving, slow, trying not to be obvious. The boy weaved through alleys and back streets, always looking both ways. Finally, he stopped beside a bench at the edge of a parking lot, where a girl much smaller, wrapped in a thin jacket with socks that didn't match, sat waiting. He handed her the biscuit. She smiled, pressed it to her cheek like it was warm magic, and then tore it in half. The boy smiled too. Clark stood frozen across the street. "I'll save half for my sister." Now it made sense. And now it didn't. He should have walked away. Should have returned to the ovens and invoices. But he couldn't move. He was rooted like a man in a painting watching something he didn't belong in. From the girl's side, a sharp cough broke the moment. She doubled over, covering her mouth. The boy rubbed her back gently. "Don't worry," she said faintly, voice crackling. "It's not the scary kind." The boy glanced around. His eyes swept past Clark, who ducked behind a bus stop sign, as if that made a difference. He didn't want to be seen. Didn't want to be involved. Didn't want to feel this familiar ache opening up in the center of his chest. But it was too late. She says if we stay out of the way, the world stays quiet. That was what the boy had said yesterday. He wasn't just talking about standing outside a bakery. He was talking about surviving. Clark turned and walked away fast, like distance could smother empathy. Back at the shop, the scent of warm dough and sugar hit him like a wave. He leaned against the back wall, one hand gripping the metal shelf, his breath shallow. He had a ledger for every expense except the weight he suddenly felt. For the first time in years, he didn't finish his midday checklist. Instead, he took the napkin with the flour on it and folded it into a shape his daughter had once taught him, a bird with crooked wings. He placed it behind the counter just beneath the register drawer. Later that afternoon, a woman came in wearing a bright scarf and heels that clicked across the tile. "Do you have gluten-free almond croissants?" she asked, without looking up from her phone. "No," Clark replied softly. "But we have something sweeter." She didn't hear him. By the fourth morning, Clark no longer questioned whether the boy would show up. He did as always, like a quiet part of the sidewalk itself. What changed was the man watching from inside, arms crossed behind the fogged glass biscuit, already warming in the oven. He didn't hand it off directly this time. Instead, he slipped outside 5 minutes early and placed the bag on the bench with a second napkin and a small carton of orange juice. No note, no gesture, just a habit beginning to take root. He stayed inside and watched. The boy approached with his usual hush. No smile, no surprise, just a brief pause as if acknowledging the bag, then sitting beside it with careful hands. He opened it like a gift that came with strings, unwrapping it slowly, like it might be taken back at any moment. Clark saw him glance toward the shop window once, but didn't wave, didn't nod, just looked, as if memorizing something he wasn't sure would stay. Later that morning, Clark stepped outside during his break and checked the bench. The bag was gone, of course, but the napkin had returned folded into a bird needle this time. Beside it lay a broken crayon. Red. He picked both up gently. The crayon reminded him of something, but the memory wouldn't come. That afternoon, he made a quiet decision. The next day, he followed again. This time, he didn't linger in the shadows. He walked a little closer. The boy led him back to the same bench tucked behind a shuttered laundromat, where the little girl sat cross-legged, head bent forward, wheezing slightly. Her face was pale. Her socks were wet. Her fingers were stained from ink or crayon or dirt. Clark couldn't tell which. The boy unwrapped the biscuit and tore it in half. She smiled, took it gratefully, and leaned her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak for a long time. Then the girl said in a voice hoarse but happy, "It's warm in my chest now." Clark's heart clenched. She didn't mean just the food. She meant that someone had remembered her today. He stepped back ready to leave before they noticed, but his shoe scraped against a loose bit of gravel. The boy turned. For a second, Clark thought the boy might run, but instead, the boy simply stared. His look wasn't angry or afraid. It was resigned, like someone who had learned a long time ago that eyes always watched before the world turned cold again. He stepped forward slowly and said, "Sir, you don't have to come here. We're not a problem. We're quiet." "I know," Clark replied before thinking. His voice was softer than usual. The girl looked up. Her lips were chapped, her eyes tired. "She says if we stay out of the way, the world stays quiet," the boy added. "That's a good thing, right?" Clark didn't answer, because he didn't know how to tell them the truth, that sometimes the quietest places are the ones people scream about later, that staying unseen doesn't always mean staying safe. He looked down and saw the girl clutching a small object in her palm, a cracked plastic inhaler barely held together by a rubber band. She coughed again, short and sharp. "How long has she been like this?" Clark asked gently. The boy stiffened. "Her breathing's always bad when it's cold, or when we don't eat for a while, but she's okay. I hold her when it gets scary." Clark nodded once, said nothing more. He walked away slowly, measured steps, not looking back. He'd built a bakery from ashes, but couldn't walk past those eyes. The next morning, he didn't sleep well. The croissants burned. He scolded himself for thinking about it too long, for walking too far into something that wasn't his to fix. But still, when dawn came, he packed 2 biscuits instead of 1, added a protein bar, taped a hand warmer inside the bag. He set it on the bench. But no one came. Not that morning, not the next. And by the third day, he felt something close to worry building in his chest, tight and irrational. He told himself they'd moved on, found a better place, a warmer bench. But when he stepped out that afternoon to clear the bench, something new was there. The brown paper bag, folded, pressed flat, inside the red crayon, wrapped in a napkin, and underneath it a library card, torn nearly in half, the corner smudged. Clark turned it over. The name written in faded pen, Elena Rivera. There was no address, no barcode, just a child's name almost invisible. He stared at it for a long time. Back inside, he tucked the card beside the other napkin birds. All of them now rested in a drawer under the register. He didn't know if he would see the boy again, but he knew this. He would keep the drawer open. The girl's swollen ankles and wet socks versus nearby joggers with smartwatches. That night, he finally remembered what the red crayon reminded him of. His daughter had called it sunlight red. She used to say it was the color her dreams were made of. He'd never believed her. Until now. Clark left the bag on the bench again the next morning. 2 biscuits, a juice box, a folded napkin. He didn't add anything else, didn't write a note, didn't expect a response. But something inside him, a quiet, unfamiliar thing, waited. The bench stayed empty. By 9, the morning rush had passed. Clark had already restocked the croissant tray, twice wiped down the espresso machine, and snapped at a supplier who delivered oat milk instead of almond. None of it mattered. He kept glancing at the bench, still empty. He went out at lunch, pretending to take a smoke break he didn't actually need. The air had a sharp bite, the kind that seeps into your collar and settles behind your bones. He stood by the edge of the sidewalk, watching cars roll past in thick, indifferent waves. Behind him, his bakery hummed with warmth and sugar. In front of him, nothing. He stared at the bench, at the folded napkin fluttering gently in the wind, like it missed someone. His eyes narrowed. Maybe they'd left town, or maybe someone else found them, a social worker, a cop, worse. Clark clenched his jaw and turned back inside. He didn't want to think about worse. That afternoon, he tried baking something new, oatmeal cookies with dried cherries. They burned. He threw them away without a word. The next morning, he didn't leave the bag. Instead, he stayed inside, watching the clock. Nothing. He hated the silence. He hadn't realized how much he'd grown used to the quiet presence of the boy, to the crinkle of the paper bag when it was lifted, to the way the girl smiled not at him, but toward warmth, like it was a thing she hadn't earned but still hoped for. Help one, and they all come, his brother had said once years ago. People are people, Jack. You feed them one time, they think you owe them the world. Clark had believed him then. It was safer, cleaner. But now, he looked at the drawer, at the folded napkin birds, at the crayon, at the torn library card with the name Elena Rivera. He closed it slowly. The next day he walked the old route, not to follow, but to find, past the shuttered laundromat, past the parking lot, past the spot with the bench. Gone, no girl, no boy, no crumbs, no sign. Just a square of flattened grass where the girl used to sit. Clark knelt slowly. His knee popped. He ignored it. Something in the dirt caught his eye, half buried soft with moisture. It was a napkin, folded, smudged. He opened it carefully. Inside, scribbled in the same crayon red, were 6 uneven words. "Sir, don't worry, we're okay." That was all. He stared at it until his fingers went numb from the cold. He pocketed the note, stood, and left. That evening, he didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, napkin laid out flat in front of him, hands folded like a prayer he didn't remember how to say. You can feed people every day, but trust takes hunger of its own. He saw them again 2 days later. He wasn't looking, just walking back from the bank when he spotted them across the street. The boy's slightly taller coat zipped up this time, the girl smaller than he remembered, wearing gloves 2 sizes too big. They were digging through a trash can behind the pharmacy. Clark stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. He crossed the street before he could change his mind. "Hey," he called, soft but clear. The boy froze. The girl stepped behind him, clinging to the bag of his coat. "I'm not here to scare you," Clark said. I've been wondering where you went." The boy didn't speak. He just looked at the man in the apron, with flour on his cuffs and tiredness in his eyes. Then, "We're not trying to get anything." "I know." The girl peeked around her brother. "You make good biscuits," she whispered. Clark smiled, a small, cracked thing. "You make good napkin birds." The boy's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite not. Then he said, "People are nice until they want something." Clark nodded. "That's true." He reached into his coat and held out a small bag. "These aren't from the bakery, just something I had at home. Granola, a sandwich, some tangerines." The boy didn't move. "Take them," Clark said. "Or don't. I'll leave it here." He set the bag on the sidewalk and walked away. He didn't look back this time. He didn't have to. Back at the bakery, he dropped into the chair in the back room and exhaled. His phone buzzed. A message from his brother asking if he was free for dinner. He ignored it. Instead, he opened the register drawer and added the napkin with the red crayon words to the pile. A small paper umbrella, broken at the hinge and duct-taped, lay beside it, something he hadn't noticed before. He had no idea how it got there. Maybe the girl left it. Maybe the boy tucked it into the bag before taking the rest. He set it upright beside the napkin birds. Families take Instagram photos in front of his bakery window. And somewhere across the city, 2 children sat on a step eating sandwiches in silence. He would never know exactly where, but he would keep making biscuits anyway. The next morning, Clark opened the shop 30 minutes late. No one complained. Regulars still came in, phones in hand, talking about deadlines and weather and other things that didn't matter. Clark smiled at them, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, and handed over pastries without flinching. But inside, something else was brewing, quieter than coffee, warmer than ovens. He didn't see the children for 3 days. No napkins, no bags, no glimpses in alleyways or across streets. Just silence, just routine, just the ache of almost caring enough. And then on the 4th morning it was there, sitting dead center on the counter like it had always belonged there, a folded napkin. But this one was different. It was shaped into a bird again, but with sharper wings, tighter creases. And drawn onto the wings were small red loops, messy but deliberate. Not just scribbles. It was a heart split in half. Clark picked it up slowly, reverently. Inside the fold was something else. A crayon. The same red one from before, shorter now, worn down to a stub. Wrapped around it, held in place by a rubber band, was a folded wrapper from one of his biscuits. And on the inside of that, 2 letters. O.C. He felt the blood leave his face. Those were his daughter's initials. Not the girl's, not the boy's. His. Clark staggered back a step, hand tightening around the napkin bird. Years ago, another lifetime, really his daughter, used to sign all her origami creations with those initials. Sometimes in pen, sometimes in crayon, sometimes with stickers from the bakery's boxes, the ones he used to save for her before she got sick. After she passed, he had thrown most of them away. It hurt too much to keep them, except for one box. One small wooden box tucked away in a closet, filled with tiny birds, turtles, flowers, all folded napkins and paper scraps and food wrappers signed AC. His heart thudded, a slow, dull drumbeat of memory. He didn't move for a long time. When he finally opened the drawer below the register, his hands trembled. He placed the bird inside, beside the others, but not with them. This one went in the center. He thought he'd buried her with the box of tiny birds, but memory drips through cracks. That night he went home early. He didn't watch the news. He didn't check emails. He pulled out the wooden box he hadn't opened in years. Inside, it smelled faintly of old glue and paper, of memories that hadn't aired out in a decade. He sat on the floor cross-legged like a child and unfolded each piece one by one. They were all hers. And somehow this new bird from the bakery fit among them like it belonged. He didn't cry, but something in him settled. The next morning he arrived earlier than usual. The sun wasn't up yet. The streetlights buzzed faintly. And there they were on the bench across from the bakery. The boy, the girl. They weren't watching the window. They weren't holding anything. They were asleep curled up against each other like kittens in the corner of the bench. Clark didn't wake them. He placed a bag beside them, biscuits, juice, a folded scarf. Inside the scarf, a small tin of cough drops, and a sticky note that read, "Warmth belongs to you too." He walked back inside, locked the door behind him, and made coffee. He didn't open the bakery on time, but he did watch from the window as the boy stirred open the bag and nudged his sister gently. She yawned, unwrapped a biscuit, and tucked the scarf around her neck with both hands. Neither of them looked toward the bakery. They didn't need to. Later that day, a woman asked him what the new display in the corner was for the napkin birds arranged in a glass jar near the register. "They're just reminders," Clark said softly, "that someone small is always watching." Girl sits in the rain while couples argue over oat milk inside. That evening, a soft rain came again. Clark stepped outside and saw a new shape on the bench, a folded paper flower. The petals were lopsided, but it stood upright. Inside, one petal scrawled in careful red. "She folds them when her lungs hurt. She says the quiet helps." He took it inside and placed it next to the bird with the heart. He stared at them both for a while. Then, for the first time in years, he took down the no loitering sign from the bakery window. He didn't put anything in its place. The morning unfolded like an echo. Light drizzle, dim skyline, a quiet bakery just beginning to glow from within. Clark unlocked the front door with practiced hands, but this time he left it slightly ajar, not to welcome customers, but to let the warmth drift out like an offering. He placed the usual bag on the bench, 2 biscuits, 1 wrapped scarf, now lightly frayed, a juice box, and a protein bar. But today he added something else, a small envelope. Inside it was a gift card, nothing fancy, $20, no note, just the weight of quiet dignity. He didn't wait outside. He didn't look through the window. Instead, he swept the floor twice, rearranged the napkin bird jar 3 times, and made coffee he didn't drink. And then, like clockwork, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps on wet concrete. 2 sets, quick, light, tentative. The bell above the bakery door stayed silent, but something changed. An hour later, when he stepped out to wipe the bench, the bag was gone. In its place was a receipt folded neatly taped shut with a sticker from one of his own pastry boxes. On the back of the receipt was a note in scratchy pencil. "We used it for socks and cough syrup. I hope that's okay." Clark smiled. More than okay. He slipped the receipt into his apron pocket where it stayed for the rest of the day like a quiet kind of badge. That afternoon, business was steady. A lunch crowd came in, talkative, polished, perfumed. But something in Clark's movements was gentler now. He offered free cookies to a toddler in a stroller, complimented someone's scarf, didn't sigh when a man asked for gluten-free, nut-free, sugar-free bread that still tastes like something. He just said, "I'll see what I can do." At 2:00 p.m., while refilling the napkin jar, he caught sight of them again. The boy stood just beyond the window, watching, waiting. Clark opened the door before he could knock. The boy didn't ask for anything. He just held out something small, a crumpled paper bag, this one folded into the shape of a hat. Inside it, another napkin bird, but this one had something tucked inside its wings, a tiny bead. It was pale blue, nothing expensive, nothing shiny. But Clark recognized it immediately. It had come from one of the bakery's apron drawstrings, a loose bead from the very apron he was wearing. "Sir, did the bread fairy come again?" The boy smiled faintly when he said it. Clark didn't laugh. He just nodded. She never really left. The boy glanced at the jars of cookies inside, then back at his sister across the street. "She sleeps better now," he said. "When it's warm, when she doesn't cough." Clark didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He just said, "I'm glad." Before the boy left, he turned back and added, "She thinks the napkins have magic. I don't know if that's true, but I think maybe the biscuits do." He didn't know what to fix, but small things those he could carry. That evening, Clark found the napkin bird with the bead still tucked inside. He placed it in the center of the display. Customers asked about it, of course. One woman said, "Is this part of a charity?" "No," Clark answered softly. "It's part of a story." "What kind of story?" "The quiet kind." She looked confused but smiled politely. He didn't explain further. That night, as the bakery closed, he stepped outside and looked at the empty bench across the street. Just as he turned to go back in, he noticed something new, etched faintly into the wood, like someone had scratched it with a key or a dime. It was a bird, simple, childlike, but unmistakably familiar. Underneath it, 2 letters, C. His breath caught. It didn't make sense, couldn't. His daughter had never been here, hadn't lived long enough to fold birds for strangers. And yet, he reached out and ran his finger across the initials. He had enough to give, he just hadn't known how to start. Later that night, he called his brother, not to argue, not to make peace, just to ask how he was doing. The conversation didn't last long, but it didn't have to. When he hung up, Clark sat by the window with a biscuit and 2 napkins. One for himself, one for folding. Clark waited all morning, but the bench across the street stayed empty. By noon, he placed a bag there anyway. He didn't want them thinking they had to earn it, not anymore. But when the rain came and the bag remained untouched, a strange feeling settled in his stomach, a heaviness he hadn't carried in years. Not guilt, not worry, something quieter, like the absence of music after a familiar song. He brought the bag back inside at closing cold and wet and left it on the prep table. He didn't throw it away. The next morning, he didn't see the boy. But at 10 minutes past 8, the bakery door swung open. And there he was. The boy? No sister this time, just him. He stood by the counter hood, down eyes a little darker than Clark remembered. "I didn't come to ask for anything," the boy said. Clark wiped his hands on a towel. "You never do." The boy held up a piece of folded paper. It wasn't a napkin this time. It was an old flyer, the kind that gets stuffed into mailboxes. On the back, a small pencil drawing of the bakery, its windows, its lights, even the jar of napkin birds. Underneath, written in small, awkward letters, "I drew it so my sister could remember the warm place." Clark felt something in his chest shift. "She's not doing good," the boy said. "We found a place to stay, but it's loud. And the woman there says we ask too many questions." He looked away. Clark wanted to say a dozen things. Offer help, ask about medicine, give a name, a phone number, anything. But the boy's shoulders tensed before he could speak. "We can't come here anymore," he said. "Why not?" "Because people are asking. About the food, about the scarf. The candy wrappers with your shop's name, the napkins, everything." Clark's mouth went dry. The boy lowered his voice. "She thinks we'll get taken away again. People are nice until they want something." Clark remembered that line. How casually it had been said before. How heavy it sounded now. He leaned forward across the counter, hands splayed flat. "I don't want anything," he said. The boy nodded, but his eyes didn't soften. "She doesn't want help from people who are kind for a little while. That's how it always starts. A few warm things, a place to stay. Then they ask for names, papers, choices." His fingers tightened around the drawing. "I get it," Clark said quietly. "More than you know." The boy hesitated. Then, with the same care he used to unwrap a biscuit, he slid something across the counter. It was the red crayon. Shorter now, almost a stub, wrapped in a clean piece of white paper with 2 words written in the center. "Thank you." Clark stared at it. Then the boy turned to leave. At the door, he stopped. "She folds birds when her lungs hurt," he said, barely audible. "It helps her not be scared." And just like that, he was gone. You can feed people every day, but trust takes hunger of its own. Clark didn't move for a long time. When he did, he locked the door early and walked into the back room. He took the folded flyer and pinned it above the sink. He set the crayon on the shelf beside the napkin birds. Then carefully he pulled out a fresh napkin and began to fold. His fingers remembered. Even after all these years, they remembered. By the time he returned to the front of the shop, the sun had begun to set. Outside, the bench was empty again. But this time, something else had been left behind. A crushed paper cup. A broken umbrella duct-taped at the hinge. Clark picked it up gently as if it were made of glass. He brought it inside and leaned it by the door. That night he couldn't sleep. He stood by his window, holding the red crayon, and watching cars roll by, like thoughts he couldn't quiet. At 3 a.m., he picked up his phone. He dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It rang twice. A sleepy voice answered. Jack. Clark swallowed hard. I need a name, he said. For what? For someone who won't ask questions. Someone who just helps kids breathe easier. There was a pause. Then you, okay? No, Clark said. But I'm trying to be. Clark arrived at the bakery an hour earlier than usual the next morning. He didn't prep the dough, didn't check the register. He simply sat at the counter, staring at the glass jar of napkin birds and the stub of red crayon resting beside it. He had called in a favor, a quiet one. No paperwork, no formal files. Just a friend of a friend who ran a small outreach shelter, the kind that didn't ask questions unless someone was in danger. The kind that kept a spare inhaler in the drawer and extra socks in a bin by the door. He wrote down the address on a note card and placed it in a small paper bag alongside a wrapped sandwich, an apple, and a scarf that no longer smelled of flour. The bench across the street remained empty for hours. Clark left the bag there anyway. By noon it was gone, and in its place something he hadn't expected. A brown paper bag carefully folded. Inside a crumpled bread wrapper, one of his own, and wrapped inside that a note. Written in uneven blue pen as if the writer had hesitated before every word. Thank you for the warm things, for pretending we weren't invisible. He read it once, then again, and a third time just to make sure it was real. The next day they didn't come, and the day after they didn't come again. But on the third morning, a call came to the bakery's landline, something that rarely happened anymore. A woman's voice, calm, steady. Mr. Clark, this is Claire Dunn from Willow Steps Shelter. You left a note with my assistant. Clark stood still. They came, she said, a boy and his sister, both very quiet. But she's been seen by our nurse. The inhaler wasn't working, but we've got her a new one. She coughed less last night. Clark exhaled slow and shallow. They asked if the man from the bakery would still leave biscuits, Claire continued. We told them you'd be welcome to visit if you wanted. No pressure. He said thank you. That was all. He didn't visit right away. Instead, he started folding napkins again. Not just birds now, flowers, stars, a clumsy rabbit that made his younger staff member laugh. And he began leaving little things on the bench again. Not because they needed them anymore, but because he did. You made the cold feel quiet. She stopped crying at night. He opened the shop early again one day only, to find a small envelope tucked into the bakery's mail slot. Inside a photo, 2 kids on a couch, the boy slightly taller reading a book aloud, the girl beside him with an oversized blanket and a smile that looked finally like sleep had reached her. On the back, one sentence in tiny handwriting. We have a window now. He placed the photo beneath the jar of napkin birds. It wasn't for decoration. It was for remembering. That evening, a customer noticed it. An older man in a pinstripe suit who ordered black coffee and nothing else. He stared at the photo for a long time before asking, Yours? Clark smiled. No, he said, but they belong here. The thank you note folded inside a crumpled bread wrapper. Days passed. Then a week. The bench stayed empty. But Clark kept leaving something, a biscuit, a note, a napkin, folded into something new. Eventually, a new family sat on the bench one day. A father and daughter. Tourists, maybe. Eating pastries, pointing at the buildings. The girl picked up one of the napkins Clark had left behind, a star, and held it to the light. She didn't say anything profound. Didn't leave anything behind. But her father smiled at Clark through the window. And Clark smiled back. That night, he found another bag on the bakery's stoop. Inside a drawing. It was the bakery again, this time in color. Crayon red door, blue-tinted windows, warm light spilling from the inside. In the sky above it, 2 small birds, one red, one gold. They weren't labeled. They didn't need to be. He framed the drawing and placed it behind the counter. Customers asked about it. He just said, It's from someone who remembers the smell of warmth. By now, the bench outside the bakery had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just a resting spot for customers waiting for coffee. It had become something quieter, more sacred. Clark never said this aloud, but he began treating it like a little altar, sweeping it early, brushing away leaves with his hand, replacing the worn cushion when it grew too thin. And every morning before he turned the key in the bakery door, He placed a bag there, not always with food anymore. Sometimes a note, sometimes a folded bird, sometimes nothing but silence and hope. And then one morning, a potted flower appeared, tiny, yellow, set dead center on the bench. Clark found it before sunrise. There was no card, no ribbon, just the plant, its petals closed tight in the cold. He carried it inside and set it near the window. By afternoon, the petals had opened. When the regulars asked about it, he just smiled. "That's our porch flower," he said. "It belongs to someone brave." "We don't sit in the rain anymore," came the boy's voice days later. Clark looked up from the counter to see him standing just outside, hands in his pockets, a little taller than before. Not by much, but enough. He stepped inside with hesitation, as if expecting to be told not to. Clark only nodded, gestured to the warm tray behind him. "I saved one for you," he said. The boy nodded, and his eyes wandered over the shop, the lights, the pastry jars, the photo behind the register, the napkin birds in their glass jar. "My sister's lungs are better," he said. "She sleeps near a window now." He didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. "She says it's like having a porch," he added, eyes still fixed on the flower in the window. "Like yours." Clark's hand paused mid-wipe on the counter. "Your porch helped her get better," the boy said. The smell made her believe mornings could start again. It was said so plainly, like weather, like fact. Clark didn't speak right away. His daughter once asked why benches didn't come with roofs. Now one did. He remembered that. The absurd little question asked with crumbs on her chin and sunlight in her curls. "Because they're not meant to be homes," he had told her, brushing her hair back. She had frowned. But maybe they should be. Clark hadn't answered then. But now, years later, he had. 2 weeks earlier, he'd commissioned a carpenter, a quiet man with kind eyes, to build a simple wooden overhang above the bakery's bench. Nothing grand, just enough shelter from the rain, just enough to matter. When asked why, Clark had shrugged. Some people sit longer than others. The boy handed him something from his coat pocket, a small sticker sheet, the kind you get from vending machines or dollar stores. One was missing. "I took one," he said. She stuck it on her lamp. Clark looked at the sheet. Cartoon birds, sunflowers, clouds. He chose one and stuck it on the cash register without a word. Then, in a moment that surprised them both, Clark reached into the glass jar and picked out one napkin bird, the very first one the girl had folded. "Take this," he said, offering it with both hands. The boy's eyes widened. "It's yours." "It always belonged to someone else," Clark said. He placed it gently into the boy's hand, watching the way he cradled it soft, careful as if it might fly away. Then the boy looked up. "She folds new ones now," he said. "Even if her chest hurts. She says the folding makes her hands remember better things." Clark nodded. "Tell her that's true." The boy turned to go, but paused. He pointed to the flower in the window. "She named it," he said. Clark raised an eyebrow. "She calls it Almost Morning." The bakery door closed behind him with a soft jingle. Clark stood for a while, hands still letting the words rest in the quiet. That evening, he moved the flower closer to the glass. He changed the sign in the window from "No Loitering" to "Rest Here." And beneath it, he taped a folded napkin, blank white waiting. Clark opened the bakery in silence that morning. No rush, no fuss. Just the soft hum of lights warming up the creak of old wood floors beneath his shoes, and the steady rhythm of trays sliding into the oven. He worked slowly, deliberately, his movements almost ritualistic. Every motion meant something. Every corner wiped, every biscuit turned, every napkin folded. He had already placed the morning bag on the bench outside, just one biscuit this time, wrapped in a napkin folded into a star. No juice, no note, no scarf. Just warmth. And by the time the first customer arrived, the bag was gone. He didn't look to see who had taken it. That afternoon, the clouds parted briefly and the sun came through the front window, cutting through the usual gray, and laying a golden line across the counter, right where the napkin birds rested in their glass jar. Clark dusted them off gently and left the lid off the jar for the first time. Around 4 o'clock, the door opened, and there they were. The boy stood tall now, just shy of Clark's chest. His coat had been patched, his hands were clean, and beside him was the girl. She had a new scarf. Her hair was neater tied in 2 loose braids. She held something behind her back. They didn't say anything right away, just stood in the warm air, blinking at the smell of cinnamon and yeast and safety. Clark offered no words. He didn't need to. The girl stepped forward and placed a folded napkin on the counter. It was a bird again, but more intricate this time, its wings patterned with small dotted lines like feathers. And tucked between its folds was the red crayon. Even shorter now, just a nub. but still enough to write with. She looked up at him and smiled. "My brother says not to cry," she whispered. "But I think I'm allowed sometimes." Clark crouched to meet her eyes. He didn't touch her, didn't overwhelm her. He just knotted his own throat tight. "You're allowed," he said, "especially here." She reached into her pocket and pulled out one last object, a photo. It was a window, just a simple window set in an old brick wall framed with white paint, a curtain on one side, tied back with string. In the corner of the photo was a flower pot. Inside it bloomed a small yellow flower. She tapped it gently. "Almost morning," she said. And then, without another word, she turned and walked back outside, her brother beside her. They didn't linger. They didn't look back. They just walked down the street side by side, their shoulders brushing like they had nowhere to be, but everything ahead of them. Clark watched them go until they disappeared behind a passing bus. Then he turned back to the counter and picked up the bird. It was light, but not empty. He unfolded the wings carefully. Inside, written in tiny red letters, "She breathes easier now." He placed it in the jar. He didn't fold another one that day. He didn't need to. That evening he swept the shop as usual, counted the register, and turned off the lights one by one. But before he locked the door, he placed something on the bench, just a napkin, blank, folded, waiting.